Okay, so some of you are, well, all of you who wrote something on this that was very good. A lot of you are already getting the character of the book. That was nice. Let me go over some of your comments. I mean, the book does read kind of like a comedy a little bit. I don't know if you noticed, but it would work well, really well on stage. I can already imagine it, right? There's a lot of exaggeration. There's these reversals. There's these caricatures, right? This is a huge caricature of the king, right? I don't know if you noticed, right? The writer is really making fun of this king, right? He's not taking him very seriously. Um, Also making fun of later on Haman, right? But there's a lot here that is ironic, poking fun, right? The narrator, whoever is writing this book, is there's a lot of irony, right? Okay, so let me go over a few of your comments, and then we'll get into the text. I'm entitling today this topic, patriarchy in question. That's the topic for today. Patriarchy in question. It doesn't end well, right? The questioning of patriarchy for our chapter. We'll have to see where the story goes. Yes, I'll start with Sosa actually. Sosa was I enjoyed your I enjoyed your paper, Sosa. I was laughing at the end. So yeah, Sosa was aggravated the whole time, really annoyed with the whole story. A lot of you were, right? He was imagining present day scenario, like who would do that, right? Invite their girlfriend from the bedroom to display her, right? So Sosa is even wondering if there is a change is possible, if any type of evolution is possible, right? From looking at the personality of the king, seems quite hopeless, right? He seems quite somewhat primitive, not very evolved, and we'll go into some of those details, right? So Sosa has already given up hope on this king. Um, yeah, also this interesting idea, right? Why such a hard time? Why does the king have such a hard time with his wife saying no, right? It doesn't seem like such a big deal, right? But you have to realize, look at the way this king is described, right? This will already answer a few questions. Let's make a list, right? I'm going to put it in the chat. There's a lot of important descriptions that will give you an idea of the character of this king, right? So he has an empire from India to Ethiopia. This should already tell you something. Okay, I'm going to write down all the points, and then you tell me what it says about the character of the king. Read my Bible. Read, it's too big. Okay, so then the other thing is that he has vast riches, right, which he's displaying. This is also important. Then you have this huge banquet, right, of 180 days. This is almost half a year, just banqueting. Okay, so it's kind of exaggerated, right? But this is all to give us an idea, right, of the personality of the king. I like the detail of the hangings because it kind of alludes to what is going to happen later on, another type of hanging, right? Um, then we have, okay, all the wealth. And then the rule for drinking was no restrictions. I like that one, right? Drinking was no, they should remind us of something, this no restrictions business. We've talked about it. Okay, and then the king, of course, he has a bunch of advisors, right, which he seems to listen to, right? Advisors are the one really, how do you spell advisors? Advisors are really holding the strings, right? King is just following. Okay, so what does it tell you? Let's start with India to Ethiopia. What is the text saying about this king when it mentions India to Ethiopia? I mean, India is the east, right? Ethiopia is the south. To the west, there is the ocean. There's nothing. So what is the text saying about the king? And they're at the north, right? Where they are. So what is the text really saying when it says from India to Ethiopia? More than that. It's even more than just he has a vast kingdom. Staish, what is he saying?
Well, we were talking about that, and pretty much it's means he's ruling the world.
Yes, he's ruling the whole world. That's what it
So
means.
the king's got quite an ego there.
Yeah, exactly, right? This is basically a map of the whole known world at the time. They were familiar with India, by the way, right? To respond to Ahmed, India was familiar even from the time we saw Solomon, right? And Solomon is before this story, right? So India was already known. Ethiopia was the southernest part that they were familiar with. To the left, there was only the ocean. The Europeans didn't exist yet. Barbarians in caves, Cro-Magnon, right? So this is basically text is saying he ruled the whole world. Now, who else rules the whole world in the Hebrew Bible? Who is the usual the one ruling the whole world? God, right? God, that's even one of his attributes, right? Ruler of the whole world. So now here all of a sudden, right? King of the world, right? That's one of the names of God in the Jewish tradition. Now here we have this king, king of the world. So, and by the way, this is a tendency in Babylon. If you read the book of Daniel, these kings constantly trying to be God, right? The King Nebuchadnezzar, same syndrome, right? They all have the same pathology, right? They always want to be God, nothing else, just me, right? So this is a kind of God ego. What does it mean, God ego? God ego means everyone is a subject and I am the only self, right? Everybody else is submitted to me. There is only one person here is me, right? You should be reminded of Cain, right? Similar mentality, right? So this God ego is an ego which cannot stand the presence of a genuine person in front of him, a genuine other. Everybody is subservient to this king or acting subservient. We know because the advisors are actually the ones pulling the strings, right? But they're acting, right? So this is a situation of a man, now to go back into our topic, which is gender, right? This is a situation of a man who has no concept of the other, whether it's a woman or another human being, right? Completely self-absorbed, the only one around. And this is a syndrome which is a natural syndrome for all of us, right? All of us, in a way, have a little bit of that king in us, right? No concept of the other. So when Vashti is saying no, this is a huge shock, right? Because now all of a sudden, this is the same shock that Cain had when Abel, right, was accepted. Again, same scenario. All of a sudden, someone else exists. I'm not the only one. Deep wound to the psyche, right? This is traumatic that I'm not the only one in the world. I'm not in control completely. There is this crazy woman over here, right? So that tells you a little bit about this personality, right? Also, this notion of a rule for drinking was no restrictions. What more does this tell you about the king? No restrictions. What's the ethical problem in general that we learned when there are no limitations? Remember Babel? Babel, by the way, same place where this king is. This is where the Tower of Babel was originally built, right? In Iraq. This is the same place, right? This is the Babel mentality that this king is embodying. Alim, go ahead.
I mean, we see like a very hedonistic type of mindset, like he'll indulge and indulge. It's because, I mean, it's going back to what we've been talking about before, like especially with Adam and Eve, like like when Adam like had no Eve, like he would be indulging in everything. So without any sense of the other, you become hedonistic, and that's what we really observe in the king.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So no limitations. This is the same that we saw when we studied the Tower of Babel, right? God was uneasy with the mentality of Babel. Why? Because nothing that they do will be impossible. Remember, that was the issue here. Same thing. When you have no limitations, as Alim is saying, there is no other. You are all by yourself controlling everything. The only time an other can emerge in your life, really, is when you forfeit, right, some of your power. The king wants to have total power, therefore no other, right? Anytime in a relationship that we want to have total power, maybe you'll have a wife or a husband, but they're not going to be a real spouse, right? They're going to be like your pet, right? Total power is essentially, intrinsically, the negation of the other. When you're not capable of forfeiting some of your power, some of your will, some of your uh, um, freedom, right? There can be no other. This king, this is Babel, this is Cain, this is complete isolation, no room for the other. So of course, Vashti is a very important character, as some of you noticed, right? So I'm going to Olivera now, right, who loves Queen Vashti. Olivera, you're not alone. The rabbis loved Queen Vashti, right? She's actually praised by the rabbis, and we're going to see how they praise her, right? This is important. They actually, some rabbis even prefer her to Esther. And a lot of commentators that I read, contemporary commentators, really have a problem with Esther. So we'll see. We'll talk about that, right? I'm going to talk about Vashti in a bit. Just so those of you who don't know, the eunuchs, this was a court official, usually who dealt, it depends, Daniel was a eunuch, right? So what they would do, especially kings like that who are so powerful, if they were surrounded by men, they had to be less men, right? So they would castrate them. This was what a eunuch was. He was castrated. So they wouldn't pose a threat to the king. So often the closest advisors to the king were eunuchs, so that they couldn't compete, right? They were not complete males because they had been castrated, and so they would not pose a threat to the king. That was the idea. You see how, I mean, it's not only the woman is silenced, but the men are castrated in such a kingdom, right? There has to be only one person, right? Only one man, right? So you can see really the degree of the ego here that we are witnessing, right? He even cannot stand the presence of other men. He has to castrate them to be around them, right? Eunuchs also were in charge of the harem because, of course, they would pose no threat since they were castrated, right? So a lot of the higher officials in the court, right, those who were closest to the king were eunuchs, right? Just so you know. Okay. Quickly looking at a few more comments before I go on. Yeah, Granik is wondering if the king is evil. King is just blown up ego at this point, right? But we can see where this eventually goes, right? So maybe the evil there that we can see in the king before he even does anything is that he has this Cain-esque ego, center of the universe type of ego, and this is problematic in itself, even if he does nothing, right? We're going to talk about this the way that the woman, right, Vashti, when she refuses the king, right, we're going to talk about why this becomes such a national security problem. We're going to talk about what was going on culturally at the time, or is in terms of gender. There was a lot of stuff going on, which made it where we can, on the backdrop of which we can understand what's going on here. Just going quickly, and then I'll actually address a lot of your issues in the lecture. So that's why I'm kind of skimming through. Morales, very good. You're really getting the text. She's talking. Who was it that mentioned the word 7? Oh yeah, that was Alim. I'll get to you. Okay. Yes. So she's mentioning that Vashti, right? Let's see. Yeah, so Morales already sensing the discomfort of Vashti because she's reminding us they had been drinking for 7 days. This cannot end well, right? You don't bring a woman into a group of men who've been drinking for 7 days. So already she knows. I'll tell you a few more details of how preposterous this idea was of the king, but already you should, as a woman, you know exactly what you're going into when these guys have been drinking for 7 days. So she's already understanding. She said something else. I'm trying to read my writing. Oh well, maybe it'll come up later. Let's see. Alim is looking at the word 7 over and over again. Perhaps you're right, Alim. There is here, right? 7 is the number of God, right? In the Hebrew Bible, it's the 7th day, the Sabbath, right? So you could have, again, here an equivalence of the king and God, like he likes to do. And of course, Alim, you are intrigued by feminism versus womanism. And I'll have to clarify that, obviously, as we go in the text. So you can maybe reconcile yourself a little bit more to womanism. So let's go in the text and see a little bit, who is this Vashti? What happened? Why the king reacted like he did? Really good reading so far. Okay, so I'm at the beginning, right? We've already established the personality of the king. It's not that he's evil, it's that his ego takes up the whole universe. And this is the mentality of Babel. And this is a context where even if he has done nothing wrong yet, ethically speaking, we are in a no man's land, right? Ethically speaking, there is no possibility of ethics in in the psyche of the king, and this is going to lead to problems, right? In a way, he has to be awakened, right? This is Emmanuel Levinas talks about this as the natural state of the ego, right? So the king actually is simply in the natural state of the ego. When you're a child, you naturally reach for everything as though it's yours, right? You have to be, slapped on the wrist occasionally to realize, oh, I can't have that. I can't touch this. I can't go there, right? As you grow up, right, you learn about the limits. But as a child, you tend to think that everything is yours, right? We know children who take someone's toy and they're like, it's mine now. And, as a parent, you're horrified your child is displaying this, but this is natural, right? So this is actually natural state of the ego, right? The pleasure principle, as Pierre-Antoine is saying, right? He's in a very child, natural, right, state of the ego. In a way, this king hasn't yet been awakened to otherness, right? And we see that there are several moments. Vashti is one of them, but she fails, right? And we're going to see why she fails, right? But he ends up even more, right, closed up on himself. And then Esther, right, attempts also later in the text, right? She succeeds. So we'll see. My question throughout the text, right, as I'm reading this text is, why did Vashti fail and why did Esther succeed? That's my question, right? I want to know what Esther did better, right? That's what I'm exploring, right, in the text. How was she able to move the heart of this type of man, right? I mean, if you read the story and you're having problems in your marriage, you know what? There's hope, right? Because this guy, he's the penultimate narcissistic disorder personality, right? That as women, we're like, when we end up with one of those, or think we do, right? We're like, the diagnostics on the internet are, there is no hope, right? This kind of narcissistic personality disorder that a lot of us end up with. And according to the internet, it's not possible to resolve this. You're stuck or you leave, right? Here we have this penultimate narcissistic disorder. And yet, Queen Esther is able to get to him. Now, this is very interesting. That's what I'm interested in, right? How did she awaken this king to otherness? How was she able to move his heart away from this kind of self-enclosure, right? Okay, so now let's look a little bit at Queen Vashti, who is greatly respected by the rabbis. Actually, here's what I read about her, right? So first of all, let's look at what he's asking her to do, because a lot of you are not measuring the gravity of the situation, right? Remember, first of all, who Vashti is. In the Babylonian tradition, royalty was passed on by the mother, okay? Vashti was the one who carried the royal line, not, okay, I can't say his name either, Ahasuerus, is that how we say it in English?
I think scholars call him King Xerxes.
Shall we go with Xerxes?
Yeah, I think that's how in the academic world.
Let's go with Xerxes.
Yeah, it's Xerxes. Xerxes.
Xerxes. It's kind of hard to say too. Okay, we'll just say the king, right? So this king is actually not from the royal line. He's a commoner who happened to marry a woman who is from the royal line. So she's the actual queen here. He's just someone who married into the royalty, right? And this explains why his behavior is so boorish and primitive. Right? This is not somebody who comes from a line of kings. He's probably some peasant somewhere picked up by the queen, and now he has all this power, right? So he's not really of the royal line. She is. Okay, now knowing this, watch what happens. He's at this party. They've been drinking for 7 days already. Now, custom was, right, the banquets that the kings would do in the Babylonian Empire. Everybody would be present, right? It's interesting that Vashti has her own parallel thing going on. This tells us something. But in general, the banquets had the wives, everybody was present. However, when the drinking started, the wives would discreetly go to their house, their private villa, whatever, and then the concubines would be brought in to dance or do whatever, right? That was a custom, okay? So take note of this custom, because this will really help you see what's going on here, right? So let me say it again. The banquets were usually mixed, right? There was no segregation like here, right? We'll have to talk about this segregation. Mixed. Wives were with the king, The queens were with the kings. Everybody was there. When the drinking started, the queens would leave because they were like, hell, I'm not going through this. I'm not witnessing this. I'm not going to lend myself to what is about to happen when they get drunk. And the concubines would come. Now, when the king is asking for Queen Vashti, who has already retired, never actually went to the banquet, we'll talk about that, to come when they have been drinking for 7 days, basically he is treating her like a concubine. And as a queen, she has to refuse. There is no way around it. She can't be nice about it, right? She has to refuse. He's degrading her now, not only to a sex object, which is the obvious what that he's trying to do, right? That, oh, look at her, she's so beautiful. Like, you know, this is my object. He's displaying her along with the rest of his, you know, whatever, what do they talk about? The silver rods, the alabaster columns, the couches of gold and silver, and my, one of you said trophy wife, right? So not only is she already a sex object, right? And a complete relegated to the level of an object, but she's also relegated to the level of the concubine. So she absolutely has to refuse, right? Now, before we go further to the king's reaction, let's go to why she was having a separate banquet. This is very interesting. This is not usual, right? And of course her banquet is not described because of course we are still under patriarchy. Her banquet doesn't matter, right? But why do you think, let me ask you this, why do you think she is doing a separate banquet of her own? What's her statement? What is she saying by that when she's doing that? Anybody have any idea? You can connect it also to the mentality of feminism as we can read about it today. There's some connection here to the feminist approach to things. Okay, let me hear you on this. Why do you think? Olivera, go ahead.
Because she kind of like holding herself to the same standards. Like if he's having his little party, I have my little party. And I think shows a lot about her personality and what she believes.
And what does it show about her personality?
That she has a mind of her own, that she thinks, you know, she's not so submissive. She has her own thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, right, so she's like, I'm not gonna, you know, just be part of what you're doing. I'm gonna do my own thing over here, right? So she has, very good, so she has a mind of her own. She has her own initiative. She has her own kingdom, right? Her own guests. In a way, also, and this is not as good, perhaps, she looks like she's imitating him, right? In a way, she's saying, oh, you're this? Well, so am I, right? Now, this type of image, she's mirroring him. She's imitating his standards of power and mirroring what he's doing. Now, my question to Vashti would be, are you really doing something in just mirroring him, right? Or imitating what the king is doing or trying to be like the king? Are you really, is this really the best act of resistance you can do, right? And I'm gonna say a few words on that. I know I'm usually hated by my students when I start to criticize feminism, but I'm gonna take this freedom right now. I'm gonna expose myself to your criticism, right? Here's my issue with, yeah, of course, Stage doesn't mind. Stage is all with me. So here's my issue with feminism, and then I'll explain how it connects to Vashti, right? And it's connected. The issue with feminism for a lot of, for several years now, has been that the main purpose has been to emulate the man. Oh, you're in the workforce, I want to be in the workforce, right? You're a CEO, I want to be a CEO, right? You have this type of pay, I want this pay. You have the vote, I want the vote, right? So all we're doing really is trying to enter a man's world and be like a man, right? Now, we are not trying to even transform this world. We're just entering a male-dominated world and trying to have a position of power in that world. My first criticism of equality, right? But this is the problem. There's two problems with this for me. Number one, we never put into question the structures of that world. And we are seeing now the issues with that. Let me say a few words on that, right? A woman who competes in a man's world, as it is going to sacrifice a whole lot of many things that she could have. Let me give you an example, right? A lot of the times we sacrifice any type of family life we could have by trying to compete in a man's world, right? So the idea is that as long as it's a man's world, equality is never going to be fully satisfying to us, because in a man's world, the competition is so high, we have to compete so much that we end up sacrificing anything we could do on the level of our families, right? A lot of women have to postpone childbearing, have to, get people to take care of their own kids, right? Because they're so busy competing, right? So as long as the world is unchanged, as long as we're just mirroring, we're not really achieving empowerment. Are you following me, ladies, for this one at least? No, Olivera. So I'm not saying we should, so let me clarify, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't be ruling along with the men. In fact, this is a biblical idea. We're supposed to both rule, right? But we are ruling without putting into question the structure of the world as it is. Does that make sense, Olivera? Go ahead, Olivera. You can talk.
No, I say I'm listening, but I find is because this idea is a little narrow, I would say, because when you bring like the man and the woman, but if you look around, it's so much bigger than that. And as you mentioned previously on some classes, there's some woman that is more feminine, more masculine, and that they are willing to do this. There are women that doesn't want to have babies. So when we just keep these two things, like the man and the woman, when it's so much more complex, I think we miss a few things. But I appreciate your way of seeing. I see how can work in some cases, especially with those two, the more traditional male and female.
Yes, thank you. I see what you're saying. Yeah, no. Of course, the problem extends so vastly now, especially with non-gender conforming and so forth. It goes way beyond, right? I'm still in the binary, guys. Sorry. In the Bible, we are stuck there for now, right? So, absolutely. So, first objection I have to Vashti is really in a way mirroring, right? Trying to be the same without really becoming truly who she perhaps could be, without having to mirror, right? So that's the first thing. The other problem I have, right, with her approach is that, yes, you can achieve equality, but the problem with women nowadays, right, is that we have achieved equality, but our relationships are in shambles, right? There has been some price, right? And of course, we have to find a way, obviously, to achieve equality and have, healthy relationships. So one of the things that I'm seeing today in the state of the world, right, is we are very powerful. We have achieved equality. We are functioning in a male world, right? But number one, the male world has never been put into question. The structures of this world, of the workforce, or the structures of I don't know how to say structures of the work that we have to do has never been put into question. And number two, we are still clueless as to what to do with our relationships, right? So we've achieved high evolution in the workforce, but our relationships remain on a very primitive level, and that is not empowerment. That is not yet empowerment. If we are empowered in the workforce and disempowered in our relationships, this is not empowerment, right? And right now, to be honest, there's two types of women in the world, and then there's a few lucky few, right? But in general, there's the women who opt out of relationships because they're so disempowering, and there's the women who remain the victims of relationships, right? So we clearly haven't figured it out. And then there's the lucky few who end up with, some miracle person, right? So, but in general, right, we either opt out or we struggle. And so in a way, yes, we're empowered in the workforce, but we're not yet empowered in our relationships. And feminism needs now to move in the next level as to how we can become empowered in our relationships. That's what I'm telling. That's what I think the feminist movement needs to begin to shift now and look at relationships instead of just ignoring them and building the woman in isolation, right? The feminist movement has for too long seen the woman's evolution or empowerment in isolation. Oh, you need to separate to be empowered. We need to now go back and see how can we become empowered in our relationships. Am I making sense? Olivera, especially since you're the one I'm talking to right now, mostly. Okay, all right. So Vashti, right? Certainly, right, pretty very good initiative, strong woman, right? But still just mirroring the king. And of course, when the time to resist comes, right, she, of course, she's totally justified in resisting, right? But it doesn't work. And so my question is, right, why did it not work, right? Maybe we can explore that a little bit. Why do you think Queen Vashti failed completely in her act of resistance? Why was she not able to be heard? What could she have done? I have no clue myself, right? But I'm just wondering, what is it you sense in her approach, right, that failed, right? We have to know this, right? Because honestly, I'm gonna talk to just the women for now, right? It's fine, right, to want to be equal and empowered and enter the man's world and be empowered in a relationship, but as long as we don't know how to communicate in a way that makes it possible for us to penetrate this world, right? Or makes it possible for us to transform our relationships, then all of our ideals are for nothing, right? This is why I'm intrigued here with this story, because Vashti is trying to affirm her personhood and fails, right? Whereas Esther, in a way, ends up a person, right? So what did she do that opened the way for her, right? We need to remember we are still in a patriarchal world. We have to learn to navigate, and we have to learn to negotiate with the men of our lives. We can't just go around, you know, how shall I put it? Imposing, right? On the, otherwise we become like the king, right? And this is kind of the issue, right? Okay, Aline, let's hear you on this.
I mean, of course, I mean, my initial thoughts is that like the king is the problem, right? And Queen Vashti doesn't have to conform to him. However, I think that there's this idea of like fighting fire against fire, and that's definitely what she's doing here. She's becoming like the king, and I guess he can't get a taste of his own medicine. When he sees like someone acting like him, he can't stand it at all, and he just has this like whole tantrum and kicks her out of the kingdom. So I guess I'm assuming Esther does something else. She like stays the better person and doesn't stoop down to his level, and then in that way, I guess that's an easier way of him realizing.
Right. Yeah, let's remember, this is so important, right? For those of us who are thinking right now, well, why should I, use gloves, velvet gloves, when acting with this person? He should respect my individuality. I don't have to put on velvet gloves, right? Remember, the king has narcissistic personality disorder. We know that these people cannot see you. Right? So this is a story for me which is about being with a person with narcissistic personality disorder. You can't reason with them. They don't hear you. They don't see you. They have no concept of the other. Are they hopeless? Are they lost cause? Should we just, kill them? No, the story is this is why I like this story, is because it's working with the worst type of person, right? Really hopeless type. And yet the story seems to say there is a way to reach that man's heart, right? And that's what I'm interested in, right? Of course, another type of king, when I think of King David, you could come up to him and tell him in his face what he just did, and he would listen, right? Because he was much more sophisticated than this king. When Abigail comes to King David and tells him, although she's very tactful also, right? But tells him basically, you don't want to do this, you don't want to kill all these people, and so forth, right? He listens, right? So we are working here with a worst case. And what I love about this text is the grace in this text, right? In other words, even this man can be reached, but the path is delicate, right? So this is really a text about how to reach a man which is completely self-enclosed, right? How can we reach even him? Right. What is unfortunate, right, about a lot of literature that I read, right? Sorry, in the feminist context, right, is this idea that the man should already be sophisticated enough, or the men we're dealing with should already be sophisticated enough to understand that we are equal, and a lot of men are. It's fine, right? But some aren't. What do you do now? Right? You can't just, genocide them. You have to. This text is really a text full of grace, in the sense of how can we still reach this man, especially if you're close to him, right? Imagine you're married to someone with narcissistic personality disorder. He won't see you, he won't hear you, he won't understand what you say. especially if you're angry, right? What's the path to take then, right? Obviously, you can divorce such a man, and everybody is free to do so. But if you love such a man and you wanted, you have maybe children with this man, what can you do? I want you to read the story like that. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Put your hand if you're with me, right? This is a text. Olivera is still, Olivera is still resisting. I mean, obviously, right? It would be great if every man could hear us out. The logical arguments we have to say about how equal we are, right? But some men cannot, right? And so what do we do with those? That's the question, right? What do we do with a man that has this disorder who happens to be your husband? Now what? I want to make it very personal, Olivera. Imagine you married a man like that. You love this guy. You see how hard it is to now just say, oh, he should just grow up. You know what I'm saying? Am I making more sense, Olivera?
I see where you're trying to go, but can I just, you asked before when Alim answered you, why does she fail? But I find it's just the way that we are choosing to look at the situation. So she's invited to come into a room full of drunk men. They're drinking for 7 days and she refused, and then we're going to look at this as she's failing. Like, we don't know the circumstances. We don't know which kind of environment should be going there. I find that we are always this narrative that constantly trying to point the woman as if she is the problematic one. You understand that you're talking about a woman walking single room as a display of beauty, objectified on a room full of men, and then she's the one who fails because she didn't do that. And it's kind of, I understand that you are trying to where you're trying to go, but I find it's beautiful what you're saying. It's beautiful, and then I find it I hope I can act like that whatever man I come to be with. But on the situation, I hope she found a little house outside of the kingdom where she felt safe and she never had to walk in a room full of drunk men. That's what I hope for. She's the biggest winner of all. That's how I don't know about Esther yet, but I mean, I don't think this woman failed. That's
Okay.
how I see it.
You know what, Olivera? I'm going to go with you on that one. I love it. Very nice defense of Vashti. I am adopting it. She didn't make, right? I don't think she made any mistake in saying no. She had to say no. Really, she had no choice. She was the queen. She could not be a concubine. There was no way, right, that she was put on the spot. There was no way to think, right? There's nothing she could have done to slow the thing down, right? Everybody's drunk. So you know what? I'm going to go with you on that one. Let us not blame the victim. You are right. Let us not blame the victim for what happens, for what the man does to her. Very good.
Last thing, I think we can appreciate her and also appreciate Esther. We don't have to say, oh, she's this and Esther is the good one. Maybe each one just have its path. And
I like that. No, you're right. Some women, right, they will choose to opt out, and they, in a way, it is the best thing to do. And some women will negotiate, right? No, I think I really appreciate what you're saying, and I'm going to keep that in mind, right, as I go deeper into this research. I really like that. This is why I'm doing these texts with you guys, right, because it's helping me fine-tune a lot of what I'm thinking. So, all right, let's not do that. Let's not bash Vashti. She did the right thing. She had no choice. And yes, and she probably, I think Kestenbaum said she was killed. She wasn't, right? Doesn't say she was killed. She probably ended up, like you're saying, hopefully, little house outside of town, away from all these fools. Right? Absolutely. Very good. Okay. Good. The only thing I would say with Vashti, if I may, Olivera, is remember the Kinect that we mentioned in the book of Genesis, right? The ability for a woman to be both K and Neged, right? Vashti is very anchored in her Neged, which is good, right? Remember, Neged is against, K is with, right? And the ability for the woman to be both with and against is really what makes for, this is what empowers her in her relationships, right? So let me say that again, right? The ability, this is an important concept, of the woman to be both for K, right, and against the man, right? Neged is what truly empowers her, right? In the relationship, right? So without bashing Queen Vashti, right? I'm just saying that in a way she forfeited some of the potential power she had. Certainly she did well with the Neged. And by the way, Esther sucks at the Neged, and she almost drops the ball, by the way, because of that, right? So Esther is the opposite. She's not that great either, honestly, at the beginning, right? So, but Queen Vashti is much stronger personality, right, than Esther. She's very good with the Neged, but she hasn't yet mastered the K, which is why in the end, as far as her relationship is concerned, she has forfeited some of her power. Is this a better explanation, Olivera? I'm not saying she was bad and did something wrong. She forfeited some of her power. Are we better now? Yes, okay, awesome. Okay, so that's what I want to, so let's not bash Vashti. Yes, let's not do that. But let's see that Vashti, the empowerment of a woman, right, in the relationship comes from the balance between the K and the Neged. Vashti is excellent in the Neged, that hasn't developed the K. Esther is the opposite, and she almost fails. She almost fails us. She's very good with the K. She's adapting, she's going with the flow, she's submissive, she's pleaser, people pleaser. You can see that in chapter 2. Oh my God, she's just such a people pleaser. You want to throw up, right? On the other hand, the Neged, she has to be pushed. You'll see later when she has to resist the king. She doesn't want to. She wants to just go on with how things are. And her uncle has to threaten her. You'll see. And tell her, don't think you will escape. You'll die too if you don't raise up, right? If you don't develop your neged quickly, right? So, two types of women, right? Neither better than the other, because Esther has severe flaws herself. Esther is lacking in the neged. Vashti is lacking in the K. Eventually, Esther is able to develop the neged, and that is what empowers her. I think I'll tell the story like that. Thank you. Thank you, Olivera. So yes, you see how good it is when I have a nice debate like this? It really helps me. So very good. I think I'll write this down in my notes also, right? K plus neged is what empowers, right? We're going to talk in terms of empowerment, right? Okay. So now it's interesting because the officials are horrified by what Queen Vashti just did, right? And you have to understand the context. Historically, at least when you look at the culture of the gods in Babylon, right? Remember that originally we had Inanna in Sumer, right? But then Inanna became Ishtar, which I mentioned in the introduction, right? Ishtar is the same powerful goddess, right? Which is now not only the goddess of love, but the goddess of war. So she's a confrontational figure. She's a castrating figure, right? And the women have this as a model, right? So again, in Babylon, women, at least at the time when Ishtar was still, revered as a goddess, there was this kind of, icon of femininity, which was a powerful, right, icon. Now, later on in the whole cosmology of the gods, there is one god that arises, Marduk, right? Which is a male god, right? And he eventually takes over the whole pantheon, right? So Ishtar is relegated to something over here, subservient god, and he becomes the one god, right, of the Babylonians. And the religion then shifts to a male-dominated religion, not so much. There's no more goddess worship anymore after that, right? So that's how the religion evolved, right? From, having an equal place for female deities and male deities. Now the male deity has taken over. This is what is going on here on the level of the court of the king, right? Powerful female figure with Vashti, representation of Ishtar, right? In a way. And they have this male-female conflict in the court, which was taking place already in the culture. So you certainly had very strong women in the culture who were already putting their foot down, probably in the house. And this is why the officials are horrified with what Vashti did, because that's the end. That will tip the balance completely. The whole society will become again female dominated, right? And they don't want that. So that's a little bit what's going on in terms of the culture, right? Now, a few words on Esther. Esther is not so great either. Like I just said, right? If Vashti is strong in the neged, Esther sucks at the neged, right? In fact, look at the way when she's taken to the king. I believe this is in this is later, right? the verb, I mean, well, first of all, she arrives, and we can see very clearly, especially in chapter 2, right? When she comes in, we'll talk about that. I'll talk about it now because I won't address it next time. But she comes in and she's pleasing everybody, right? Everybody, she finds favor with everybody, right? And this is telling you she's strong with the king, right? With people pleaser. But at the same time, she's very passive. And the text mentions this. I know you didn't read chapter 2, but I'm just going to point it out. When she is taken to the king, let me go there right now. Yeah, chapter 2, verse 16. Go with me briefly right now. Just everybody with me, chapter 2, verse 16. Okay. So here it's saying Esther was taken to the king, right? This is... yeah, and this is passive, right? There's no initiative. There is no agency in Esther. She has no sense of her agency, in fact, right? And this is why the only thing left for her to maintain some kind of agency is secrecy. And we know that, right? Women who are under heavy yoke of control will escape in secrecy. You see that with children who lie. Have you ever wondered why some kids lie so much? When you're in an atmosphere where there is total control and you're not allowed to speak your truth, right? Or you'll be punished or despised, you learn to lie, or you learn to keep things secret, right? So Esther, in a way, has she's very attuned. She knows how to read the crowd, right? She knows how to read the room. She's very sensitive to what's going on, much more than Vashti, who's a queen. She doesn't need to be sensitive. Esther she's a concubine, so she has sensors out how to read the room. How can I adapt, right? And she's sensing no room for me, no room for any type of freedom or agency. And so the only way I can maintain some part of me intact. By the way, I want you to realize, right, that Esther didn't come, I know they make it seem like a beauty pageant and all the women volunteered. That wasn't what happened, right? The women were kidnapped, right? These women were kidnapped from throughout the kingdom. They were young, they were teenagers, they were virgins, they had never been with a man, they did not volunteer, right? They were kidnapped, abducted, and brought there. This is a situation of complete control. There is no room for you to say or do anything wrong, or you will be killed, right? And so she, however, and that's where we see that there is more to Esther than the surface, right? She chooses to hide her identity. What does that mean? Let's talk about that a little bit. What does it mean when she chooses to hide her identity, namely her name, right? She has two names, Ishtar, right? The same as Esther. And then she has Hadassah, right? Why does she hide her name? What is she doing? Kestenbaum.
Well, I know we mentioned this earlier, but or I think we mentioned this earlier, is that Esther itself means hidden. It comes from the Hebrew word satar samach taf resh, meaning to hide oneself. And in fact, this book is read in Jewish circles every year during the holiday of Purim. And traditionally, one of the ways in which we observe it is, nowadays we kind of just dress up in any costume, but it used to be you would wear a mask. And the whole point is you're like hiding your true identity. And so Esther was faced with this very serious point of contention, whereby she knew the dangers of being a royal wife and getting involved in the house of Ahasuerus. But at the same time, she also knew that she had a responsibility to her people. So the fact that she's given these two names just represents this identity crisis she had between wanting to preserve her Jewish identity and be a Jewish heroine, while also knowing what she needs to do in order to appease the king and, be a royal queen.
Yes, excellent, right? So she is hiding her name, her identity. In a way, she's hiding her true self. Or you could say she's hiding her power. She's hiding her agency. She's hiding everything that she cannot be, right? In a situation where there is absolute control, which is where she is, right? There is absolute control over her body, over her mind, over her spirit, right? She yet still finds a way to keep her own spirit alive by sheltering it in the secret, right? So you can tell then that this woman, there is more than meets the eye. Yeah, she looks completely submissive, going with the flow, pleasing everybody, but in the fact that she hid her name, meaning her identity or her destiny or her power, right? Remember, the name in the Hebrew Bible is a very powerful thing. It's the destiny of someone. It's their power. It's their identity, right? Their true self is in the name. Hiding her name means she's putting a damper, she's sheltering, protecting right now, hiding, dissimulating her true power, her true identity. So we don't know yet who she could be. All we see right now is passive young girl, probably 15, 16 years old, right? Very young. And of course, at that age, you know, you're not like the mature Queen Vashti, who is already of royal line, right? So she is just going, right? She's just taken from place to place and following wherever she's led and submitting and surrendering. But there is something more to her, right? As we see from the way that she hides the name. By the way, just to go in the Talmudic commentaries on her name is interesting. Few things. Hadassah is the symbol in the Talmud of righteousness, right? Because there are some passages in the prophets that, you know, assimilate that plant to the righteous who survive after a crisis. They're still righteous, right? This is Hadassah, the plant which represents not the righteous who's righteous because everything's going well, the righteous who survives and is still righteous at the end. This is the plant Hadassah, what it means. And so Esther, of course, or Hadassah, is carrying this possibility of going through this whole ordeal and coming out as righteous as in the beginning, right? Yes. I was trying to see. Yes. And one more thing. She's listed also, this is interesting, also interesting detail. She's listed among the 7 prophetesses, women prophets of the Hebrew Bible. She's listed among Sarah, Miriam. Let me just write these famous names down. Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, whom I don't know, and then Esther, right? And the sages comment on this, and they say these women were wise. Why? Because they knew how to talk to men. This is interesting, right? Wisdom is the ability to talk to men and sway them, right? When in a world where the man has total power, right? So the wisdom here is, how do I navigate and how do I reach, right, this particular individual? There was one more thing I wanted to say, but somehow I'm not seeing it in my... No, okay, I said it already. Okay, great. Okay, so now I hope you're getting a better sense of the 2 women, of what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to, so without bashing Vashti, thank you, Olivera, right? I'm trying to show how Vashti, right, perhaps where she lost some of her power was by not cultivating the K. And we're going to now look throughout the rest of the text how Esther, right, builds up her neged, right? How she already has the K, but she has to build up the neged, and how she individuates actually and becomes empowered actually through this bringing together of those 2 qualities. That's the main thing that I'm seeing in this text, how she brings the 2 qualities together and emerges powerful woman, right, and is able to make a transformation, right, not only on the king but on everything else, right? Remember, we're in the sacred marriage context, right? And I think I mentioned last time, before Inanna could encounter Dumuzi, she had to become a full woman, full-fledged woman, right? And so likewise, Esther has to rise to her full individuation before any sacred marriage can genuinely take place, right? And this full individuation will be when she is able to harmonize the K and the Neged, right? That's what I'm seeing here. Okay, next time we're going to look at life in the harem. So we're going to have a nice spa day. We go and look at why there's so much description of, you know, beauty treatments, and what is the lesson, what are we supposed, why is the text spending a whole chapter on cosmetics and beauty treatments? We're going to look at that. So please read chapter 2 and 3 for next time. This is next week. Oh, quick question. So let me just pause or